All right. Good Friday morning, everybody. I'm Jonathan Pritchett. This is the first live stream on Trinity Radio Extra. And with me today is MJ Jackson. How you doing?
Good day to you, sir.
Yeah, a lot of kerfluffles on the internet this week about Christ is King. So I figured we should talk about it.
Yeah, I never knew that the Jewish Messiah, um, being who he is, would be an anti-Semitic slur. So,
Yeah, so this I think this stems back from a tweet from last November, I think, between a Twitter exchange or X exchange, whatever we're calling it these days, between Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro. And I believe Candace had posted something about, I have it here, blessed are the peacemakers, for they
mhm,
shall be called the children of God. Blessed
mhm,
are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And then below that, she put Christ as king. And I think Ben Shapiro tweeted something to the effect of if you don't want to, get paid by this, you don't have to work here or whatever. But then this has kind of taken a life of its own over the past 4 months, and with Candace Owens and the Daily Wire, you know, splitting up or whatever, their contract ended, or who knows? They may have just parted ways, ended the contract, or whatever happened behind the scenes. It seems that over the Israel Palestine stuff, um, a lot of people are out there saying Christ is king, but they may not necessarily, according to some, think that it means anything other than an anti-Semitic slur, and not so much a presentation of the gospel, which you and I we affirm the King Jesus gospels. So when
mhm,
we say Jesus is king, we're talking about the gospels or the gospel, you know.
mhm.
So that's kind of it's interesting to see this from that perspective. But my thoughts on this is I, there's two sides to this, I think. There are the people that generally want to affirm Christ is king, and they see it trending, they want to jump in on it. But I do believe that there is another side to it where I kind of see the point where you can take any word or phrase and your intent of your heart behind it, you could be uttering it as not necessarily as a trumpeting the kingship of Jesus, but as a way to stick it to people.
Mhm.
And I do see both sides of this, and I see that some people are going to innocently post on social media, Christ is king, and then they may get attacked for it, whatever. That could happen. Other people are posting or tweeting or whatever this to get attention, to bandwagon on the intent behind it, to make it some sort of anti-Semitic slur. So there's kind of two sides of this, I think, that's going on in the culture right now, which interestingly enough, if this goes back as far as my following this whole thing back to a tweet from last November, I even think I remember Dr. Michael Brown talking about it then, or at least he wrote in the Christian Post about it after that had happened. And so this is nothing new really, but it just came back to prominence this week, I think, with the whole Candace Owens Daily Wire stuff. So, what are your thoughts on all this?
Well, um, you know, Candace has not changed. This is who she's always been. Even from her comments about the black community to George Floyd to Juneteenth, everybody loved her. Nobody was mad at her. She's always said or made bombastic statements. I mean, this is who she is. Um,
Your favorite, she's your favorite black conservative, yes?
no, not at all. Sure, Michael Singleton is actually
I
my
was being
favorite.
facetious.
I know you are, but see, I can name them, and
Okay.
if there are people on here who are looking for reasonable black conservatives, sure, Michael Singleton, Glenn Lowry, those would be a few. Um, but she's always made crazy statements. This is not new. Things didn't start to get ugly until she made certain criticisms, not of Jews, because she's made statements about Jews, and really nobody was getting upset. But when she started making statements about the nation of Israel, is when things began to get hot for her. And people know how I feel about the term woke. People know how I feel about how we should be measured and nuanced. If we're going to be people who come on platforms and give our thoughts and things like that, how we should be precise with our language. But yes, it is a little disturbing when people are weaponizing the term Christ is King as, you know, as a way to stick it to certain folks. Now, there's a part of me that would like to stick it to Ben Shapiro, but not for him firing Candace Owens,
Mhm.
because this was coming one day. She was going to slip up one day with her handlers, and this is just that wake up call that Paul Mooney would often talk about on the David Chappelle show,
Yeah.
if you've ever watched it.
Oh yeah.
So this is that wake up call, and hey, you're black,
I
just
think
just
I
to
watched it.
just to remind you.
I think I watched it when you were too young to watch it. Probably you're about a decade behind me, I believe. But yeah.
so
Um,
no, no, I'm not surprised by what's happening, because it's happened with other terms like woke, uh, things like that. So it happens with Marxism. It happens with a lot of things. So
yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people on various sides of these issues try to do this, right? I mean, um, there was a post that I saw here recently, where I think it was a reverend that was trying to say that anytime a white person uses like Chicago or DEI, what they really mean is the N word.
well,
And
hold on. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, right? I know where you're getting at, and I didn't mean to cut you off. But let's go to this whole bridge. What happened with the Baltimore Bridge? And a lot of people on the right are saying that this happened because the mayor is a DEI hire.
as
Okay,
a elected official.
exactly. That's the whole point. But they're saying that, and so folks are saying this when phrases and stuff get thrown around like that, it's really the new N word. How can a mayor be a DEI hire when he's an elected official? Really, it seems like what you want to do is besmirch the man.
Yeah, but when you post a tweet like that in
Yeah,
response to people who are being knuckleheads, right?
yeah,
So people are always going to be knuckleheads. If somebody wants to issue a valid criticism against DEI, or they want to talk about problems in Chicago or whatever, people are going to assume the worst about them if they say anything, and that's a problem too, because people should be able to voice valid criticisms without having to have that charge that you just want to say the N word. And likewise, Christians should be able to proclaim Christ as King without having to deal with any possible um, repercussions where people are saying, "Oh, you're just trying to be anti-Semitic," which is ridiculous. So I worry about the co-opting of language on both sides to try to imbue meaning that people may not intend to have when they use certain phrases. Does that make sense?
uh, it's a postmodernistic practice being practiced by some of my friends on the right, where we repackage and reword things such as Christian nationalism. Uh,
Well, that's another thing
yeah,
that I always,
I gotta take a shot at certain folks
yeah,
too.
well,
I love you, but
yeah, my views on Christian nationalism pretty obvious. I'm no fan, um, but that's what I get. Like, I believe Christ is King to the point to where I understand that Jesus is Israel's Messiah and the world's true Lord is the gospel, and that because of His life, death, and resurrection, we can be saved. But Jesus Himself, believing in the totality of the second person of the Trinity and His earthly ministry that matters. It's not just footnotes to Paul or anything, right?
Mhm.
So if I'm saying Christ is King in a way to reflect that, and I have Christian nationalists telling me to say Christ is King. You know how they get all on, when you criticize, they say Jesus is Lord, say Christ is King, like as if I don't affirm that because I
Mhm.
don't want a Christian nationalist authoritarian bootlicking government for the
Mhm.
United States. So to me, it's just one of those irritating things every time this kind of thing happens. But Christian nationalists seem to use Christ as King, which, depending on how you understand, the ancient Mediterranean world and Jesus's ministry situated in that context, uh, first century Israel, it is a political statement in and of itself.
Mhm.
But Jesus also did say that His kingdom was not of this world. He also told Pilate, that you have no authority that wasn't given to you, right?
Mhm.
Um, so give it to you from above. That's John 19:11. John 19, in fact, comes to my mind being number one, Good Friday, and number two, um, where Jesus was called the King of the Jews, right?
Mhm.
That was placed above His crucifix, and they didn't want it to be there. The Jews didn't want it to be there, right? And they said, say that he made him out to be, right?
Mhm.
Say that he said this, and he's like, no, what I've written, right?
Mhm.
But there are a lot of verses in the Bible. Revelation 19. You can go to 1 Timothy 6:13 through 15. Talks about how Jesus, going back to Isaiah, um, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, crowned in glory, all of that stuff. So Jesus is King. Christ is King. And that is a political statement in of itself. So the idea that you should politicize that statement for other things other than its original context, that yes, Christ is King of the cosmos, right?
Mhm.
And you're trying to get this statement, whether it's as an anti-Semitic slur or as a rallying cry for Christian nationalism, to mean something that was never meant by it, in my opinion. Is Christ king over all the earth, including the United States? Well, of course. It doesn't follow from that we need to have an authoritarian Christian nationalist government. So it's just,
Well, like I said, I mean this is the proposition that Christ being king is being co-opted for sinful human political purposes, sinful American political purposes. Okay, this is not new. I think we just said it earlier, but we see this happen all the time with the MLK "I Have a Dream" speech. Well, I agree with MLK, and if you vote for so and so, you want Marxism and you disagree with MLK. Well, we know what MLK stood for as a whole in his what he stood for holistically in, you know, in the body of work that he presented throughout his life. And so much like that, yeah, we do see people being antagonistic uh, with Christ is King, and um, how we know this is based on the fruit that they bear. And I think one way that we can kind of combat this thing is to ask the question: do you know what you're saying? What does that mean? You know, do you know what you're saying, and what are the implications of the kingship and the lordship of Jesus Christ? What does that mean for America? What does that mean for us as individuals? You know, what does that mean? Um, but you know, back to the whole Candace Owens thing. She once again she knew she was headed out, and she's doing everything in her power to garner support for her future endeavors.
Yeah. Well, it's the thing that really irritates me is I see that on Twitter this Nick Fuentes guy.
Mhm.
I think he is legitimate. I don't know a whole lot about him. I just see people post stuff on Twitter. I don't even. I think he's like was banned from social media or something. Um, but he is legitimately anti-Semitic,
Mhm.
and I probably, from what I understand, racist and all kinds of stuff. So he's like the white nationalist version of Christian nationalism.
Mhm.
Is that correct? And so he lashes onto these kind of things and gets roped into it to where there's a part of me that wonders when they do this is with a guy like him, and he starts taking up this as a slogan for his views. Um, it just seems to me that this just further makes it harder for normal Christian people to be able to say Christ. So how do you say Christ is King? So how do you how do you push back on a cultural milieu that's going to even poison a phrase like Christ is King? It- because if you keep saying it, you're going to get demonized by somebody who thinks you're nefarious. But if you don't say it, then you're not preaching about King Jesus. So it just seems like you've got to figure out a way to navigate whenever phrases that seemingly mean something else become co-opted, and it happens to a lot of phrases. Like I said, woke, 15 years ago meant something entirely different than it means today. Like when I think of woke, I'm thinking of, uh, blue-haired lesbian professors in Portland, right? That's but I blame them because they're the ones who were saying that they were woke,
Mhm.
but it's just that's just the way that these phrases evolved. And Christ is King is not a phrase that we can just hand over to people who have nefarious ends for it.
Yeah, I see a comment here. Candace Owens is married to a millionaire Jewish man. She doesn't need money. I didn't say she needed money, but let's just be honest. There's nothing more that wealthy people like. Uh, the one thing that they like more than money is more money. Uh, and I don't think Candace Owens would also like being at the mercy of her husband or the mercy of anybody. But like I said, there's nothing that they like more than money, other than more money. So if we also follow what Candace is doing, Candace is going on black media platforms and really trying to broaden her base. This is just what she's doing, and as they say, follow the money. So this is a good move on her part, but I don't support her.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been the biggest Candace Owens fan personally, but I just think it's interesting that this is happening in the culture. It's come back around now for Easter weekend. It's
Mhm.
Good Friday, and we're still talking about this, or you and I are talking about this, but there's still tweets going up about this whole kerfluffle as of 5 minutes ago. It's just um, one of those things is just we got to figure out a way that we can continue to use phrases that mean something else other than what people are trying to usurp it for. And so when somebody would come back at me, my way of dealing with it is, yeah, that's obviously not me. You can check my Twitter feed about my position on anti-Semitism or Christian nationalism or whatever. But for normal people out there, these things have a way of spiraling into the public consciousness where Christ is king becomes a no phrase. I mean, we've seen this happen to not just terms like woke or whatever you had mentioned earlier, but evangelical is just a word that nobody wants to wants to use anymore because evangelical is now a voting bloc, for example.
I mean, once again, I would like for people to explore even the assertion, how is Christ being king anti-Semitic? Like how? Just because the person doesn't like Jewish people or people of Semitic descent? I mean, what makes it anti-Semitic?
Well, I mean, church history. I mean, even if you just even prior to Luther, but Luther, famous example, church history has not all shows that there are times in church history where Christians haven't always been friendly with the Jewish people. Haven't
once
Jewish
again?
But you can go to the Talmud and say Jews haven't always said polite things about Christians. I mean, so it's one of those things that these things are going to be out there, regardless of what anybody in particular means by it. But I do think that there's a sense in which there are people who use phrases like this to be anti-Semitic because, the whole Christ killer thing, I can remember back when the Passion of the Christ came out, and they removed the subtitles for the line, it was in Aramaic anyway, but the line where the high priest says blood be on our hands and all that, and they removed the subtitles for that because they didn't, because it was still trying to be sensitive to that kind of thing, even, back in, what is that, 2003 or whenever that came out. So there's always these shaky grounds to navigate with in the culture when you're trying to preach Jesus, and we are commanded to preach it to all creatures, and that includes Jews. And that's going to be interesting when I play a clip from Andrew Clavin coming up, because he weighed in on this kerfluffle. And so if it creates extra challenges now when people are going to automatically assume the worst from saying a statement like Christ is king. But at the same time, you should never surrender phrases just because of bad actors in the world, right?
Thank you.
So one of the biggest problems that Christians have had in communicating and contextualizing the gospel is we let other people beat us to the things to which they turn for ill reasons instead of positive ones, So this is kind of where I'm like, I'm going to keep saying Christ is king.
Yeah.
But that's the same thing as I'm going to keep saying, some parts of diversity, equity, and inclusion are bad. And I don't mean the N word by that. Or parts of Marxism. I'm not going to surrender that. But there comes a point where the intent on the one hand is to, because see, Christians have to fight both sides of this thing. Because there's the intent on one hand for people to use it for nefarious purposes. There's people on the other end of that who want to demonize the slogan because it was used that way to where they can suppress the slogan itself. And so so if you're just a normal Christian, you've got the problem on both sides. So I think we've got to be careful to not continue to surrender ground, to continue to surrender language, because it matters.
I'm with you. You look, I've been beating this horse for a
Oh,
long time. I said, all right, got to be careful uh, lumping everything into CRT. Got to be careful calling everything woke. Got to be careful. Got to be. People like, Matt, you're doing too much. It's okay. All right.
well, but here we are, and it creates a language problem.
Got to be careful calling everything Marxism. You know, Act 6. What happened? What happened to Act 6? The certain widows were not getting their fair share. What did the apostles do? Selected Greek was it deacons with Greek names to represent these widows, make sure they get what they needed.
Yeah.
Now, if a person abstracted the practice from the Bible and brought it to today, they would call it, oh, that's Marxism. Representation, that's Marxism. Okay. Got to be careful. Some things it's just stupid. If everything is Marxism, nothing is Marxism.
Right. So that was an interesting comment from Chris Fisher. He says not wanting to fund wars in the Middle East, not being anti-Semitic.
I'm with you.
The media wants to make. Yeah. See, I think that's what I was saying about. There are two sides of this, and what ultimately gets suppressed is the Christian message, right?
Yeah.
Because the message coming from like the Nick, am I saying his name right? Nick Fuentes. Anyway, I think that's how you say his name. Anyway, the message from those kind of people is a hindrance to the gospel, and the culture saying the gospel is Nick Fuentes types, or even Candace Owens types, for that matter. Whatever they're trying to see, when you demonize all of it, that side for using the rhetoric, whatever they intend by it, it's still just going to be Christians get the short end of that stick from either side, because one side is using it for bad and the other side is pointing out if you use it, you're bad like them, and they'll guilt by association you. So it's kind of lose-lose again for Christians. So we gotta push back on this kind of thing.
Right. And we also got to be consistent in our practice.
That's why I said Jesus is, I put on the title of the video, Christ is King and not a slogan. And so I think it's important for Christians to call it out anytime we see bad actors using this as a slogan. And, I'm not going to back down from that.
No.
Because, I mean, it's just, in our theological sphere, sorry. We're just now getting around to seeing the increase of popularity of the King Jesus gospel over against the what you call justification theory types, and
we call it a mutilated gospel.
Yeah, the truncated gospel. And so, the last thing that I assure you, the last thing that like a Matthew Bates or a Scott McKnight want to see is saying Christ is King is now off limits, because it's been demonized as a phrase associated with anti-Semitism or Christian nationalism and all of that. So yeah, this kind of just drives me nuts. And so, me, I'm just like, I'm not going to surrender to this, but it makes you work harder, because now you have to call out people that are not normally on your radar, because they force you into this situation,
Well, welcome to my world.
Yeah. So one of the worst things that I've seen about this whole thing was this take by a Daily Wire person.
That I find, again, and this is not personal.
Here, let me back that up. This, again, folks, new at the producing thing. So, but this take right here, I don't really follow this guy. I know he's one of the Daily Wire hosts. I don't know much about him. All I know from what I gathered watching the fuller context of this video is he's a Jewish convert to Christianity. So, and I'm guessing politically conservative. That's about all I know. But when he was discussing this topic, this came up, and I just, this was just a bad move here.
The biggest truth that Candace told in that way that I find, again, and this is not personal animus toward her, but I find difficult to excuse this when anybody does it. The truth that hid wickedness, that I thought was the most wicked truth to use, was the truth that Christ is king. Christ is the king, and one day every knee will bow and recognize it, because he's not just my king, he's king of the universe. But when you use that phrase to mean that God has abandoned his chosen people, the Jews, through whom he came into this world incarnate, and that he's broken his promises, his covenant with the Jews, you are quoting scripture like Satan does in the Bible. You are.
So I just wanted to stop that right there. There's a little bit of theological problems. When you don't understand, sorry, I have oral gel on my. I've been dealing with mouth issues past week. I thought I got it all. Yeah, I've got a toothache and I've got gum problems. So I'm going to the dentist on Tuesday to be better. The theological problems we have is not seeing Christ as the fulfillment of the old covenant and ushering in a new one. So it's not an abandonment of anything. It's a fulfillment of something.
Mm-hmm.
And the inauguration of a new covenant. So that right there is just in my view, now I could be wrong, but in my view, is totally wrong from the start, the wrong framing, I would say.
No, I totally agree with you. Now there are Christians who do believe in a certain replacement theory, but I mean that's a decent debate to be had, and I would encourage people to look at some of the literature that's out there. You can look at some of Dr. Michael Brown's debates that he's had on this subject. People would disagree with him. I would probably have some differences with him because I'm more so in the fulfillment camp. But I, like I said, I most certainly believe that God cares about Jewish people for the sake of the fathers, the patriarchs.
This is a whole Romans 9 through 11 thing.
Yeah.
And, in our show last night, we kind of were previewing that a little bit with what was going on in chapter 2. And who is the true Jew, if the uncircumcised, if they're able, and, through the Spirit, law in their hearts, all of that, is that not, circumcision? And if you are circumcised and you violate the laws, will that not become uncircumcision?
Mm-hmm.
So that whole passage in 25 through 29 of chapter 2 of Romans. And so I understand the skepticism of the term replacement, scary language, replacement theology. But, there's no doubt. I don't care, dispensational, covenantal, whatever variety of theology you take, we all have to have what I would call a grafting in theology.
Yeah, and once again, what was the purpose of God's calling of Israel to begin with? It wasn't so you can, sit up, have a nation and, and beat your chest and claim to be God's chosen people, to be a light to the nations. And ultimately, what we're saying is Jesus did that. Where Israel failed, Jesus being the true Israel, succeeded in being a light to the nations and grafting in the nations as well, grafting in individuals from every tongue and nations. So, yeah, it invites a deeper theological discussion, which I think would be pretty cool because it'll clear some of this up. As you said, who is the true Jew?
Right.
I think the Bible also talks about it says so in Genesis, where God says, I know Abraham will teach his children to do justice. And surely it's not justice just to engage in certain acts that are being done right now.
Yeah. So Christians typically shy away from chapter 2 of Romans. We talked about this last night, but it says a person is not a Jew who is one outwardly, and true circumcision is not something visible in the flesh. On the contrary, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly. The circumcision is of the heart by the spirit, not the letter. So this whole business about circumcision is, I mean, especially in the first century. I mean, we don't think much about it now because, I mean, most people in the West are circumcised just for health or whatever. But I mean, I don't know about most, but many, right? So circumcision's kind of lost its religious significance in a lot of ways. But in the first century, this is Paul being pretty hard. I mean, to say that a Jew is one inwardly. So, this goes, but chapter 9, verse 6b, not all Israel is Israel, right? These are hard phrases of Paul in his context. But in our context, you can see how talking about these passages would be pretty difficult too, because you got to, there's going to be difficult conversations depending on who the audience is. Because, I mean, could you preach the gospel to a Jewish man and use language that Paul uses in Romans chapter 2 or Romans chapter 9? Paul had no problem using that kind of phrase, So it's one of those things that it becomes even more complicated, especially when you have certain political ties to a nation like Israel, which I'm all for, democracy in the Middle East, close ally politically. But and this is going to get me in a lot of trouble, but I'm not a dispensationalist. So I don't see a whole lot of religious significance there. It's not a temple, so it's not, Judaism proper that's being practiced, rabbinic Judaism. That's a different thing than biblical Judaism. Where, and then like the temple down the street from my house here in Evans or outside of Evansville County, Temple B'nai Israel. It's a Reform Judaism. It's just basically universalism with Jewish trappings, right? That's not the same thing as what like a conservative, which is kind of the more moderate Judaism, or the Orthodox, like Ben Shapiro. So, what is a dispensationalist? Well, according to John MacArthur, every Christian that believes in the Old Testament and New Testament. I don't buy that definition. In fact, on this very channel, I talked to a dispensationalist, Keith Cherlin. So you can go watch that video. The thumbnail I'm proud of. Don't call it a comeback. Dispensationalism's been here for years. So, yeah. Giving my age away, but that's fine.
Don't call it a comeback.
You don't know nothing about LL Cool J, do you?
A little bit.
Okay. He's an actor on one of those NCIS shows, right?
he was what Deep Blue Sea rapper?
Yeah.
Always licks his lips.
Yeah.
Give him some chapstick.
All right, so let's listen to him a little bit more because it gets even more worrisome.
Quoting scripture to your purposes, and that to me is specifically wicked. When you spit that phrase at Ben Shapiro, my friend Ben Shapiro, And you know, I understand this. All of you who love Ben, and I love Ben, and Jordan Peterson, you all want to see them find Jesus because you know what joy and freedom that gives you, and you certainly feel that it alters your relationship with God. But when I think about this, to be honest with you, you know, and I know some people will disagree with this, but life is not a game show where you guess the name of God and you get to go to heaven. Honk, you know, yes, the name is Jesus. I look at Ben's life and I think if Ben were to embrace Jesus Christ, it would cause devastation to his family, to the people who love him, to the people who listen to him, to his position in the world. I just have this feeling that God has put this guy where he wants him to do what he wants him to do. And as you know, I feel that, you know, the Jews were not abandoned by God.
Will Hess, we call him Wes, pointed this out last night, Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 through 36. Do not think that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I've come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's foes will be members of one's own household. That's the cost of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Die to yourself, take up your cross, and follow Jesus. And so I'm sympathetic to what he's saying here about, you know, when you catch this phrase at Ben Shapiro. But the truth is, Christ is king, and he's Ben Shapiro's king. And you're commanded to preach the gospel and to say the consequences for the here and now for someone to convert to Christianity is too great for them to convert to Christianity. That's the opposite of the Great Commission, in my opinion. I don't know how anti-Great Commission you could be. But that's pretty much. It's also, I mean, I'm not trying to be cheeky here, but you could say that to not witness to the Jews because of some belief that even Paul himself said, I wish I could be accursed for my kinsmen according to the flesh, right? Paul thought that the Jews were in trouble. But Andrew Clavin in his video talks about, you know, we just heard had broken the covenant. There's still, you know, it's saying that you know, as if there's some sort of special thing for the Jews outside of Christ. That's very dangerous. And to not witness to the Jews so that they can be like Andrew Clavin here and give their life to Jesus. Clavin's going to inherit a kingdom that Ben Shapiro won't. But we know what the flip side of the inheritance is. Mm-hmm. You're saying, my dear friend, I don't want him to convert to Christianity because it's going to be bad for his family. And God has him right where he wants him.
It's going to be bad for his money.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be bad for his career.
Well, you just saying that sounds anti-Semitic to some people.
Well, I mean, just...
No, I know you don't mean that. I'm just saying, you know how they say if you talk about a Jewish man and money in the same breath, you're being anti-Semitic. Just like if you dare to criticize Israel for any of its foreign policy, you're anti-Semitic. I mean, it's so...
I mean, that is worse than saying that only that black people can't be racist because they don't have power. It's silly. It's a that's a rhetorical move.
Yeah, if you use a definition that they learned 5 minutes ago, that's like the third on the list, or at least was 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, it just shuts down conversation. But I reference back to what Jesus said to the rich young ruler, about following him. And then what did they say? How hard it would be for a rich man to enter into the kingdom. Or anybody who has a lot of earthly status and things like that.
Yeah. But this is very worrisome language. And, when I was in Israel, I went with a dispensationalist group. They were, mostly the charismatic types. And they were the majority of the people that were on the tour that I was on, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, they tell you don't proselytize and any of that, Okay. But beyond that, their attitude was that, these predominantly atheists in Israel, right? They're mostly atheists, that they're somehow in a special covenantal relationship that we shouldn't witness to them for the gospel. So I've seen this kind of thing before, that Andrew Clavin's like, God hasn't forsaken his covenant with the Jews. And so they've got their thing, and God has Ben Shapiro exactly where he wants it.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So we understand that there was a unilateral covenant where God caused Abraham to go to sleep. There was the Abrahamic covenant, there was the Sinai covenant, there's also the covenants that Jeremiah talked about. So at what point, we know what Jeremiah said, that God is going to basically make a new covenant. Okay. Is the Sinai covenant still in effect? Because we deal with the Hebrew Israelites and we point out to the Hebrew Israelites, like, look, y'all blew it. Even if you do think that you are a Jew, you couldn't keep that covenant. And so at what point does God have to keep dealing with people who continually break the covenant? And as far as what we know, Jeremiah said that there's a new covenant. Jesus said there's a new covenant. Like, what are we talking about here? You're muted, my friend.
Oh, Jesus fulfilled the old covenant and ushered in a new one.
Yeah.
And, talks this very weekend, right? Holy Week, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is ushering in the new covenant with his body and blood. So I'm with you. It's like, I understand there are issues, especially in post-World War II world that we live in. There are issues with evangelizing Jewish people. But it strikes me as almost anti-Semitic to say you shouldn't evangelize. That's, to me, it sounds like you're saying you don't want them to inherit eternal life.
Mm-hmm.
That seems far worse than even if let's attribute to Candace Owens, and I know that you're really happy to do this, so let's attribute to her the most possible amount of malice that we can, right?
She's a very disgusting individual, but let's go ahead.
Give her all the malice that you believe exists there in the first place. Let's attribute all of that to her when she, according to Andrew Clavin, spits out Christ is King. Okay. So what?
Yep.
So what? That's Candace. That's her thing. What does that have to do with preaching the gospel to your friend Ben Shapiro so that he can inherit the kingdom and not have to perish? That seems far worse than worrying about what Candace Owens says to Ben Shapiro on social media. I mean, what are we doing here?
Right.
And it's a question that goes back since, I've got a lot of, and I'm not casting all of this on all dispensationalists, and I'm not casting this on all, the AOG types that I went to Israel with, but there is a strand in American evangelicalism who has that precise attitude. And I can't think of anything worse than to withhold the gospel truth, because Paul himself thought that he would wish that he could be accursed so that they wouldn't have to be. And yet you think that they've got their own, or that Christianity's some sort of plan B, and God's got plan A over here. And well, maybe they'll see Jesus at the end or something, depending on how you this is a good question. If God is saving all the Jews, where do they go when they die right now? Very good question. Depending on how you take, and all Israel will be saved when the full numbers of Gentiles come in, there are very dangerous ways to take that, because even if you believe at like a one-time end Jews that are alive? What about the Jews that have already passed on that didn't know Christ? Are you getting into post-mortem evangelism now? You know, it's like I always have to ask these questions. What are we doing? So I know it's the difficult thing, and politically charged contexts, it compounds the problems, especially when basic Christian verbiage is getting usurped or co-opted for nefarious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was Andrew Klavan, right to push back on that, but he draws a completely wrong conclusion from wanting to push back against that. He goes so far the opposite direction. So I gotta say, I mean, if what would Ben Shapiro think if I said Christ is King to Ben Shapiro? It's his first instinct to think, oh, here's another Candace, right? So I don't know. That's just I think the attitude of the Andrew Clavens on this particular issue, at least, is doing his friend Ben Shapiro a disservice. And he kind of gives this flowery thing in the video where, well, if you seek the truth, and Jesus is the logos of the cosmos and then or the universe, and he is king, and then every knee will bow, yes. And so eventually they'll come around and recognize this.
It's a coward's way out. It's really cowardly.
But I agree with Andrew Klavan that they will one day recognize this, but as judge, not as Lord and Savior.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem. And, you know, I'm not going to say that I love Ben Shapiro more than Andrew Klavan, but I think it's more loving to tell Ben Shapiro the truth and to continually proclaim the kingship of Jesus as Lord and Savior to your Jewish friend Ben Shapiro.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm with him on the let's push back on all of these Christian nationalists, push back on all the anti-Semitics, the Nick Fuentes, and all that garbage that I don't want to align with at all. I mean, I don't have a problem fellowshipping with some of those people if they're not like the worst people on the planet, but a lot of them are the worst people on the planet. So I don't want to fellowship with those people. But like the Christian nationalists like Tim Stratton, whatever, is fine. But when you get into like the Nick Fuentes type folks, I want nothing to do with that. And I don't want Christ is King coming out of their mouths when what they mean is we want power.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's really what that's about. It's not about the kingship of Jesus. It's about the power of a particular type of person or group that wants political power.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's for noble reasons, like we just want everyone to be Christian and we want God to be praised and we want to be okay, but you still have the power. It's still that power, and you can dress it up however you like, but you know, there's still a little bit of Baptist in me, and I don't really want the state involved, you know, in all of that, and so I'm going to push back on that. And when you look under the hood of some of this Christian nationalist stuff, I mean, there's some really awful people there, and they have some really bad ideas, especially the white Christian nationalists that you know. They're almost as wanting segregation as some on the left. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not on board with any of that stuff. I'm on board with the worldwide kingdom and the one new man in Christ, right? People from every tribe, tongue, and nation. That's my team, right? That's who Jesus is king over everyone. So, yeah. I'm going to push back on that, but I'm not going to listen to the haters who want to. If I say Christ is king, they want to point a finger at me and say you're a Christian nationalist or you're a anti-Semitic, anti-Semite. No, because Christ is king, and I'm not with all that. But you need to repent and believe the gospel. That's where I'm at, because I'm not going to give up any more words either. and all of this madness. And I'm sure this is the flavor of the week or whatever. But yeah, I'm not going to get on board with either team, the ones trying to demonize the phrase and the ones trying to co-opt the phrase, right? I'm not on either team of that. Alex has a question. What do you guys think about Doug Wilson's Christian nationalism view? I know nothing about Doug Wilson's Christian nationalism.
Okay, what I'll say is I know that Doug is not the same type of theonomist that Greg Bonson and Rush Dooney and maybe some of the guys at American Vision. I know that it's a different flavor of theonomy. It would be called general equity theonomy. Okay. I'm not necessarily a fan of it. Because once again, I think that we are in the new covenant, and basically extrapolating the general equity of the laws in the old covenant. I mean, we could talk about it, but there are trade-offs when Christians get into power and seek to influence and change the world through the use of the sword. I think Jesus said, "Count up the cost." Maybe he said it in a different context, but I think that you better really think about it. Think about what you're doing when you take up the sword like that and use the power of the government. It could have a ripple effect
Chris,
down the line.
Chris says, yes, we do need power. We have society castrating and sexualizing children. Yes, but we have a political structure to deal with that now.
Yeah.
There's a difference between Christians being engaged in the political life of the nation and the ethical life of the culture, and then mandating Christianity, right? Those are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now I'm stemming from the Stephen Wolfe brand of Christian nationalism, where they have the Christian princes who, of the state, who deliberate doctrinal issues in churches. No. In fact, I saw a discussion with him and Michael Bird, and what was interesting is Michael Bird had to push him on certain things from his own book that he wouldn't volunteer himself. He gave the most vanilla version of his Christian nationalism, and I think that's one of the reasons why this kind of thing gets in the door with a lot of people before they really look under the hood. You know what I mean? They give the most benign ideas, like the most surface level. But I was glad that Michael Bird pushed him on some of the deeper stuff that he didn't even want to get to. So,
but back, like I said, back to the point. There are differences amongst the positions out there with Doug. With Doug Wilson's his Christian nationalism, which is really theonomy, and people can go look into the theonomy, see what that's about.
Yeah. So yeah, any final thoughts on this before we sign off?
Well, we got pushed back on it and kind of press people to be consistent and to look at the kingship of Jesus in its full theological context and look at the implications that flow from that. And we just can't allow certain things. We just cannot allow to be co-opted for sinful human political purposes. And so
yeah, my thing is, don't surrender language. Don't be policed for language. If people try to cast aspersions to you for saying Christ is king or whatever, you know who you are. So if the shoe don't fit you, don't worry about it and just rebuke them. Because either there's somebody who is seeing the other side do something they shouldn't with the phrase, and they're trying to lump you in, which is not cool. So don't put up with that. But at the same time, call out those who Christ is king is nothing but a slogan. It's not a theological commitment. it's more of a slogan to advance other things that have nothing to do with preaching the gospel and the good news. So you're going to have to call that out too. But ultimately, proclaim the good news of the kingdom of King Jesus, of his death, especially Easter weekend. We're celebrating the death and resurrection. Every time you take communion, representing the covenant that Jesus spoke of, the new covenant, you proclaim his death till he comes, and then you proclaim the risen Lord till he comes as well. So I want everyone to have a happy Easter. Remember that Christ is king. Don't let anyone sloganize it, and don't let anyone demonize you for stating theological truth. And with that, we are out of here. We'll see you next time on Trinity Radio Extra.